Now we're going to talk about the different ways to write the equation of a quadratic function. Okay. Before we get into the different forms of a quadratic function, we're going to talk about the most basic that a quadratic function gets, okay, and which is called the parent function. Okay. So the most basic that a quadratic function can get is y equals x squared. Okay, so for something to be a quadratic function in an equation, you're looking for it to have an x with a square in it, or x squared in it, and that should be the highest exponent that you see in that equation. Okay, so if you see something like that, then it's a good indicator that it's quadratic. Okay, now there are different ways that they could write a quadratic function, and depending on how they write the function, you're going to be able to tell different key features from it just by looking at the equation. Okay, so one way that they could write a quadratic function is in what's called standard form. So standard form of a quadratic function is going to be y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, when it's in this form, the a, b, and the c are going to be just regular numbers. Okay, and the key features that you can tell from just by looking at the equation is you can look at the number that's in front of the x squared, so your a. Whatever that number is, if it is a positive number, that's actually going to tell you that your graph opens up. So if the a is a positive number, then it's going to tell you that it opens up. Or if that number that's in front of your x squared is negative, then that's going to tell you that it opens down. Okay, so if it opens up, remember it's going to look like that because these are our u's, so it's going to look like that. If it opens down, it's going to look like that. So you can tell if it's going to open up or down just by looking at that number and seeing if it's positive or negative. Okay, the other thing that you can tell from this is by looking at the constant in the equation, that number that does not have a variable, so that would be your c. Your C is actually going to tell you the y-intercept of your graph. So it's going to tell you where it crosses the y-axis. Okay? So if you had an equation that was in that form, so let's say you had the equation, remember f of x is the same thing as y. Let's say you had the equation f of x equals negative 1x squared minus 6x minus 1. You will automatically know, because this is in that form, you will automatically know that it's going to either open up or down, and you're going to already know what the y-intercept is. So notice, look at the number in front of x squared. That is a negative, so you know it opens down automatically. And then this number is your c, so you already know that your y-intercept would be negative 1. So you know that u will cross the y-axis at negative 1. Okay, so that's if it's in standard form. If it's in factored form, it's going to look something like this. It's going to look factored. Okay, so factored, which we will talk about in the days to come, is going to look like this. You're going to have a number in front of parentheses. You're going to have x plus or minus some number, okay, so that x1 is going to be a number. And then you're going to have another parentheses with x plus or minus some other number, okay. When it's in this form, that number, that's the a, is going to do the same thing that you did over here. So the a is, again, going to tell you if it opens up or down, depending on if it's positive or negative. Okay, so if it's positive, it'll open up. If it's negative, it'll open down. But now it's going to tell you, if it's in factored form, it's actually, depending on what these numbers are right here, it's actually going to tell you your x-intercepts. So those numbers that's like where the x1 and the x2 are going to tell you your x-intercepts. Okay, now the key here is you're going to have to actually solve it a bit to find those, but I'll give you an example. So let's say that they give you an equation and it's y equals 1/2 x plus 4 x minus 2. Okay, notice that's in that form. So because this number, which is your a, is positive, that tells you that it's going to open up. So you already know that. But to find the x-intercepts, what you actually have to do is take each one of those and you have to set it equal to 0, which we will be doing in the days to come. But to find the x-intercepts, you've got to set each one to equal to 0 and solve. So like the x-intercept, one of them would be -4, and then your other one would be, if I add the 2 to both sides, 2. So your x-intercepts would be -4 and 2. Okay, so that would be where it crosses the x-axis. So if it's in that form, you'll be able to tell these two things. Okay, the last form that you could put a quadratic in is what's called vertex form. So vertex form looks like this. You've got y equals, you're still going to have that number up front. Then you're going to have x minus plus or minus a number squared. And then outside of parentheses, you're going to have a k. Okay, so when it's in this form, you still got the a. So the a, again, is going to tell you if it opens up or down. So that part is kind of the same regardless. So if it's positive, it'll open up. If it's negative, it'll open down. Okay, but the reason why this is called vertex form is you could actually get the vertex straight from it. Okay, so if you take this h, you have to change the sign of it. So if you take that number and change the sign and write it down, and then you just simply literally bring that number and copy it, you do not have to change the sign of that one. That coordinate is your vertex. Okay, so to give you an example of that, let's say, and I'll have to write my example over here because I didn't leave myself enough room. Let's say you have the equation y equals x plus 2 squared minus 1. Okay, well, the number up front is technically a 1, so that tells me because it's positive, it's going to open up, so it opens up. And then what I was talking about with the vertex right here, you have to take this number and you change the sign of it, and then you literally just bring that number down and copy it down. That would actually be the turning point of your parabola. So this would be the vertex. And you could actually look even a little further. If it opens up, that means it looks like that. You could tell me that that would be the bottom point of that parabola. So since it's a bottom point, it would be called a minimum. Okay, so you could even tell me that from just that equation. Okay, so that's the different ways that you could write a quadratic function, and then that's the different things that you could tell depending on which form it's in.